You're listening to Coaching for Leaders. This is episode number 56, airing on September 24th, 2012.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Welcome to Coaching for Leaders. This is the show for leaders who want to improve themselves so they can better engage and develop others. Whether you're a seasoned leader or leading people for the first time, improving your leadership skills will drive your success and, most importantly, the success of others. This week's topic, 4 ways to lead virtually. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coaching for Leaders. My name is Dave Stachowiak, and I'm coming to you from our studio out here in Orange County, California. And I am so glad to be with you again for another week. And if you are tuning into this show for the very first time, welcome. I'm so glad to have you. If you care about people and you care about leading a team of people, or maybe even just a single person, or maybe you just want to lead yourself more effectively, this is a great place for you to be, to get you some great tools and resources that hopefully will help you to lead more effectively and be able to influence others. And today's topic in particular, I know is something that is of value to me because I am doing a lot more leadership virtually. And I know that that's something that's very true for many people that are out there in the business world and the organizational world, that we are all being asked to do more and more virtually. And I know for me, this is true because my primary workplace is actually now in our home. In fact, our studio is here in our home, and Bonnie and I are blessed that we have this house that we can, have a dedicated space for, an office and a home office studio here. So I can close the doors and record, and probably 60 to 80% of my work these days, including all the podcasting we do and audio recording, is done out of our house. And that is becoming more and more normal for people to do. In fact, in some industries and in some organizations, it has become the standard of having people working virtually. Now, before you tune this episode out and say, this isn't helpful to me, I don't work virtually, I don't lead people virtually, even if you are someone that goes to a place every single day, whether that be an office or a place where you are getting together and working with people in person, you are probably still doing some type of leadership virtually. We are all talking more over email. We are all talking and leading more over conference call, over webinar. And so even if you normally work with people and you see them face to face, chances are, I bet if you sit and think for a couple minutes and think about the week you have ahead, I bet you are doing at least some leadership virtually this week, if not even maybe a good size of your week. And that's why I am so pleased to welcome our guest this week. I have asked my friend Mike Demas to join us. And the thing I love about Mike is one of the things that I try to really consider anytime I invite a guest onto the show is, first of all, Mike has really lived leading virtually. He's been doing it for many, many years, decades really, and has a tremendous amount of valuable experience in doing it, so knows it well. The other thing I really like about Mike is not only has he lived it, but he's also researched it. So he's looked at both it from the academic side, but also from the practical business side. And so I know that his experience is valuable. And when I reached out to him last week, I knew that he would be someone that would really have some good perspective for all of us as leaders on how we can lead people virtually. So I did have a chance to have a conversation with Mike last week. And so here's my conversation about how we can lead virtually with Mike Demas. And before I start the conversation, I should mention, I said up front, there's 4 ways that we'll talk about leading virtually. And you'll hear those 4 things during the interview, and at the end, I'll summarize those 4 in a real concise way so you've got something that you can walk away with. So here's my conversation with Mike Demas. I have my friend Mike Demas on the line. Mike is the Director of Strategic Planning at Micron, and he has previously worked for Intel. And Mike and I were very fortunate to get to go to Pepperdine together and do some graduate work, and that's where we met. And the other reason I've asked Mike to be here today is because in addition to his professional work, Mike's also done a whole bunch of work around researching people who lead virtual teams, and actually has done a lot of time researching, thinking about this topic. And so not only has done it a lot professionally, but kind of looked at the research side of things too. And so I'm just thrilled to have him as a guest. Mike, thanks so much for agreeing to be here today on Coaching for Leaders.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you. And I thought we'd start off here by just kind of setting the stage and, looking at like, what is a virtual team and, why are organizations doing virtual teams more and more these days?
Yeah, that's a good one. What's the definition? I think in my mind, it's a team that's, and it can be, virtual teams can take many forms. But I think, I think if you look at the history of virtual teams, it really started with telecommuting. I think people were working from homes, calling in on their telephones. But as the internet came on, I think companies became more interested in, rather than moving people around to where the jobs were, they would just go acquire companies or acquire divisions that were in other places that had the skill sets that they wanted. And it was a lot less expensive for them to move those people. So they began to just work as virtual teams. And what we mean by a virtual team is really that we don't work in the same office. And in my research, I always refer to local teams as teams where everybody works in the same building. They sit in the same office space. They maybe share the same lab equipment, whatever. And a virtual team is really just a team that doesn't work on the same site. So it can be in the same state, it can be in the same city. It can be national, international. It can take many forms. Like I said, in some cases, some businesses are run completely virtually where everybody works out of the house. So there's many, many ways to look at a virtual team.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, Mike, because I was thinking as we were, as I was preparing for our interview today, that of all the clients we work with and the organizations I've worked with over the last few years, I'm having a hard time thinking of any organization right now that we've supported that doesn't have some aspect of virtual teams or is entirely virtual, like you said. And so I'm curious as to why do you think, in addition to some of the obvious reasons, like, just not having to get people moving around geographically, what are some other reasons organizations are moving toward this?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with globalization and less expensive workforce. I know when I was at Intel, I managed a software team for many years. It was getting expensive. The software engineers were getting expensive here in the U.S., and we were able to get software engineers for about a third of the cost over in Malaysia or over in India or over in Russia or maybe China. So there was a lot of motivation from a cost savings perspective to distribute the teams. And I really do. I think the cost savings is a really big part of the move.
I know one of the things that leaders are running into more and more these days is not only setting up a virtual team, but inheriting a virtual team that maybe someone else has established or tried to establish in some cases. And I'm wondering, what is the starting point for getting started leading a virtual team, particularly if you're inheriting a team that someone else has set up or an organization's established prior?
Yeah, so I think the biggest hurdle in virtual teams that I've seen through both experience and through my research, I think, is this idea of trust. There's a lot of suspicion, especially in the case of maybe it's a case where a company bought another company, and now all of a sudden these workers that were working in an environment where they knew everybody are all of a sudden reporting to an office that's far away, a manager that's far away. In many cases, it's in a different country, different culture. So it kind of falls onto the leader to be able to try to build trust within the organization, and that's a very difficult thing to do when you don't see the people every day. So I think to your point about how do you kick this thing off, it really has to start by, and I think it's the case where the leader has to go to the team and spend some time there. I know when I was managing the team in Malaysia, for example, I used to go spend 2 weeks there about once every 6 or 8 weeks. And also, conversely, I would bring members of the team over to work for extended periods of time in the U.S. so that they could integrate with the team. I even had a rotation set up so that people could go spend time working in Malaysia as well from the U.S. So I think that's a really important part of it of getting the thing kicked off is getting some face time.
So one of the things of being successful managing virtually is actually stepping out of the virtual environment and stepping into the real world environment.
Yeah. There's that kind of kickoff phase where everybody has to get to know each other. It's just basic human social skills. Going there, taking them to lunch. Maybe you meet their families. You have some team builder events, things like that, to get the team to trust each other. Because now this person's coming in that's sort of this disembodied voice that talks to them on a speakerphone, and all of a sudden this person's in charge of their career, and a lot of people get nervous about that. So yeah, I think that FaceTime is very important.
I've certainly seen situations where that hasn't worked well, Mike, and I'm sure you've seen a whole bunch more than I have. What are some of the common mistakes that you see leaders make when they either accept a role in leading a virtual team or maybe trying to set up a virtual team for the first time?
Yeah, so some of it, they have to have the willingness to get some face time is part of it to start. And then they have to be more structured in the way they manage. They have to be clear about roles and responsibilities, clear about what deliverables are, clear about deadlines, and to the point where things have to be more formal. I think you have to have either a SharePoint site or a website or something where you track, where you create metrics, where you can watch what's going on. Because one of the things that I think a lot of managers don't realize when they start managing a virtual team is I don't see the people every day, so it's very difficult for me to gauge what they're doing.
Right.
They could be, as far as I know, they could be watching YouTube all day. I don't really know what they're up to, right? So in a traditional office where you came in and, 8 o'clock, everybody walked in the door, you would see them at the water cooler, you'd see them at their desk. You could observe their behaviors more closely, and that would become part of your evaluation about their ability to get work done. So maybe you didn't have to have as stringent measurement systems or metrics in place to measure performance. When you're managing a virtual team, really those metrics and those performance indicators are all you have. And actually, if you read a lot of the literature, a lot of the studies that have been done on highly effective teams, what you find is the managers that were successful typically were pretty darn good about creating metrics and clear roles and responsibilities and those kinds of things.
What's a time you've seen someone really not do that well? Is there something that sticks out for you in memory that says that would be the thing not to do?
Yeah, I think what I call the hands-off manager would be the way I would put it, is you get the manager who's not willing to put the time in to actually monitor what's going on. So they might throw a task or a job or a project over the wall to somebody that's working on it virtually and then not think about it much for a month or some period of time. And then by the time they check in with them again, they discover, wow, this project's 6 months behind, or things weren't happening the way they wanted to, or they didn't get or the worker didn't get the proper feedback, and he ends up going down the wrong path, et cetera, et cetera. And I've actually seen that happen. But actually, the biggest one, which is maybe not quite as easy to measure, is there becomes these sort of like little fiefdoms or factions within the organization where the people that work on one site start to form their own kind of a culture that may be different from the other site, and it becomes an us versus them sort of a situation. So they start to feel like, like for example, if I work here in Northern California, maybe I'm managing a team that's in Chicago, for example, and maybe the folks in Chicago start to say, oh, gee, those people in California, they really don't know what they're doing, and we don't really like what they're doing, and they start to form this sort of an internal dialogue amongst themselves where they start to exhibit negative behaviors about, and attitudes toward the group that's trying to influence them that's far away. And if there's a groupthink that sort of gathers around that, it makes it very difficult for the manager that's, say, in California to continue to manage that team in Chicago because they don't trust them. And so it really does come back to trust. And I've seen that happen many times. And it's really funny because I'm thinking in particular about a group that I managed that was in Denmark. because they're, in addition to being it was a company that we had acquired when I was working for Intel.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to there being a different corporate culture there, we had to deal with a different country culture.
Sure.
So there were many things. And actually, my favorite story from the Denmark folks, and I just love this story because it really does sort of highlight the cultural differences between the two organizations, was when we were at Intel, we had a ranking and rating system for performance evaluations. And so at the time, the general manager of the division went over to Denmark and told the general manager there that was running the group in Denmark, he said, well, we're going to start doing performance reviews and we're going to use this ranking and rating system. So you're going to have to rank and rate all of your people. And the manager in Denmark said, well, sure, that's easy. I'll just rank them all the same. You know?
Yeah.
And the manager here in the U.S. said, no, you don't really understand. We have, somebody's got to be number 1 and somebody's got to be number 30 or whatever the number was, right? So you're going to have to rank them. Because when I was working for Intel, they had a policy that people that were in the bottom third consistently over some period of time eventually were asked to leave the company, right? So there was a lot of, how do I say it? There was a lot of, an awful lot of pressure on the employees to perform well because they were being ranked and rated every year. And we could debate the merits of that system. That's a whole other subject, right?
Sure, yeah.
But it did highlight, though, that because the Danish is a socialist country, they're very concerned about things being fair, and which is great. I mean, I think that if you've ever been to Denmark, it's a wonderful place, and they're wonderful people. And they wanted to make sure that things were fair. And, that's not necessarily the way it is in the U.S. We're a little more competitive, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, but yeah, and that group never really did gel very well. We always had sort of this kind of contentious relationship with the Danish and had a hard time getting things done.
What would you, in a situation like that, Mike, I think is a really good example of just some of the real life challenges that fall into this as far as cultural boundaries. What can a leader do to, or maybe even in that situation, what did ultimately happen as far as getting that working well, and did it ever work well, and what should have been or could have been done differently?
Yeah, I think, in this case, the leadership, I don't think, was very sensitive to what was going on there. It didn't work very well, and eventually we ended up selling that division off. And I think a lot of it was because that particular leader was very rigid in his beliefs, and he wasn't really willing to compromise with the folks, the Danish folks. And I think it just led to a situation where we never really, if you think about the Tuckman model, the storming, norming, performing, mm-hmm. We were always kind of in that storming mode the whole period that I was in the group anyway. And I think it was directly the fault of the top leadership in that particular division. I think that they were just, they were hell bent on, hey, this is the way we do things, and if you don't like it, it's too bad. Mm-hmm. And I think it didn't breed a working environment that was conducive. And as a part of that same acquisition, we had another group that was in Germany as well. So actually, there was another group in Greece too. So we had Northern California, Denmark, Germany, Greece. We had a lot of different cultures going there, and the whole dynamic was different. And it was interesting. I think we actually probably were more. There was definitely more. The relationship between the Germans and the Americans was much more effective, I think, than what was going on between the Danish and the U.S. And eventually, we shut the group in Greece. We had to shut down too because we had performance issues there as well. So, but yeah, I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy, and it's not a decision to be taken lightly. I think if you're put into a situation where you say, hey, I need to start. I've got a company right now, and I'm thinking about acquiring a company that's someplace far away, and especially if it's in another country. That's a decision that's not necessarily something you can make just based on financial data. There are inefficiencies that happen, and depending on how you manage that, can make a big difference about whether or not you're successful. So, it was actually that experience that got me interested in this whole virtual team problem, and it's the reason that I did a lot of research on it, because I still work in that environment where most of my meetings are on a Polycom, just like I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah.
And I think I've gotten pretty good at it now, but it took me a long time to kind of get to where I am. So,
well, you mentioned two words that have come up as themes. One, you've mentioned the word trust a whole bunch of times already, and although you didn't say this word explicitly, the example in with the Danish group of flexibility and the importance of that, and that leader not having flexibility in that situation, and that as a result it didn't lead to performance. In addition to those, what do you find that leaders who do this well, who are able to lead virtually, what works well for them?
I call it over communication, and for one thing, I think flexibility. You hit it right on the head. I need to be willing as the leader. Got to be willing to take that phone call at 3:00 in the morning. You need to have those meetings that are 8:00 at night. You need to be available for the team, and some managers are not. If you come from the mindset of I work an 8 to 5 job, you're going to have a very hard time operating in a virtual world. I actually got to the point, and I coined this term myself. I don't know if it's a real term or not, but I used to just call it weaving. You sort of end up weaving your work into your life. You don't really have defined work hours, because as the manager of a virtual team, and again, I'll use the group in Malaysia. One of the things that I did intentionally was I had my staff meeting on Sunday nights at 6:00 with the folks in Penang, because that's 8 a.m. on Monday for them.
Sure.
So I have an office in my house, and every Sunday night my family knew at 6:00 I'd say, well, I'm retreating to the office, and I'm going to go have my staff meeting with the folks in Malaysia. The reason that I did that was because it was convenient for them, not because it was convenient for me. I could have forced them all to stay, Monday night late at work, met me in the morning when it was convenient for me, but I never did that. The other thing that I would do is I had separate staff meetings for the folks that were here in the U.S. and the folks that were in Malaysia, because that way I didn't have to ask both teams to be flexible. We would just have occasionally, like quarterly or every couple of months or so, we would have kind of a joint staff meeting, and we always scheduled that at a time that was in the evening for us, so it was good for us, or in the morning for them, it was good for them, depending on what worked best for each group. But I tried not to make one group feel like they were always being put upon.
One of the things I'm hearing you say a lot is that flexibility is key in a lot of different ways of being able to engage people. And, I think that probably leads me to my next question, Mike, which is, how do you engage people when you can't see them? Because, when you mentioned this earlier, in the old traditional world and workplace, and some of us still somewhat work in this environment where you'd see people at the water cooler and you could observe and have sort of those spontaneous interactions. That just doesn't happen as much virtually. So how do you engage people, and what do you think about when you're trying to engage people that are 4,000 miles away?
So we use here at Micron, we use instant messenger a lot, and I think tools like Skype and Twitter now is actually a good thing. There's actually one that's like Twitter, but it's secure, so you don't have to broadcast to the whole world. But there's a lot of those kind of social media tools that make it a lot easier to communicate with people. For example, when I'm sitting here at my desk, I've always got my instant messenger up and running. At any time, really 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I can get a ping from somebody in some other part of the world. I have, in this group that I'm working in right now, some of the people I work with are in Italy, and we have another group that's in Singapore. So I get messages kind of all the time. I've got an iPhone, and I freely give out my text. I really love text messaging. I'm a big believer in text messaging because it saves time from having conversations. And I encourage people to text me anytime. But all these great tools that have come from the internet, this ability to kind of create a virtual world that's instantaneous. You can sort of replicate the water cooled conversations with instant messenger, believe it or not. Because sometimes you can be chatting with one person and then you can bring somebody else in and say, hey, what do you think about this? So I think between email, instant messenger, Twitter, your iPhone, text messaging, those kinds of things, you can kind of, it's not exactly like the water cooler, but it's similar. And it helps people to feel like you're kind of working together too.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating you say that because, one of the things I'm always trying to think about, Mike, is how do I work efficiently and effectively with, people that I'm supporting and leading. And one of the things I try to do is actually get off the grid once in a while. And so you've mentioned the importance of this availability and being able to be responsive. So one of the things I'm curious about is how do you balance that availability, kind of that always on mentality and to extent, this is kind of the world we live in now with the, hey, I need time to just sort of focus and think and get out of the fray as a leader and actually do some strategic thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I this newest version of Lynx, I don't know if you're familiar with Lynx, but that's
no, I don't think so.
Microsoft's kind of latest instant messenger enterprise.
Oh, okay, cool.
It links itself into your Outlook calendar. So like, for example, now I have this meeting scheduled on my calendar. It knows that I'm in a meeting and it'll post to others that I'm in a meeting.
Oh, interesting.
So I can post a status on here that says do not disturb or whatever. So people can see, like I'm looking right now, because you mentioned that, I'm looking at people in Boise, I'm looking at people in Colorado, and I can see exactly where they are. I can see if they're at their desks. I can see if they're away. I don't know. Maybe this is a little Big Brotherish. I'm not sure, but it sure is great for me because like Jenny is my admin in Boise, and if I want to ask her a question, I see she's on right now and it's green. I could poke her right now and ask her a question, and I know that she'd answer. So it's kind of nice. And yeah, I think the way you still have to manage your time, and I'm no different, I think, than any other manager that works in a local site. I find myself pretty much between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Booked solid. I mean, I think even my lunch hours now, for the most part, because Boise's, our headquarters, and that's an hour off from us. So their lunch hour is an hour off, and so they have lunch at 11 o'clock, and we have lunch at 12 o'clock. So they're all back to work at 1 o'clock, and it's difficult for me to even go away for lunch, to be honest. Yeah. So, but I can schedule things and create time for myself, which is what I do. I'll just put things on my calendar. These are working times.
Sure.
But again, it's just really the flexibility. And if you're talking specifically about the manager, and this is what I did my research on, by the way. A part of what I was looking at was job satisfaction for virtual managers versus local managers. Because I had a suspicion that the virtual managers, it was interesting actually. I think my hypothesis was that the virtual workers loved it and the virtual managers kind of didn't like it, because it was more work for them. But actually, the research that I did didn't really show any significant difference in their ability to get things done. So,
interesting.
I found that interesting, but I think, and as I wrote in my dissertation too, I think that there's a lot more research here. It's a relatively green field. I think that the world of virtual teams is pretty new, and there hasn't really been a lot of research done yet. And there aren't really a lot of best known methods yet, right? So people are sort of wrestling with this. As I told you, I think I found a set of things that I know works for me. I know when I first joined Micron, I spent a lot of time traveling to other sites and getting to know people, just like I said before. And now that I know everybody, I can work pretty much virtually all the time. I don't really have to travel as much. Although we still get together, the whole group, we still get together probably once a month or so. I've established relationships with these people. I've established trust with them, and I think we can get a lot done.
So a big part of this is making that investment up front of building those relationships. And as you make that short-term investment, that it really pays off for the leader in the long run and pays off for the team, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's the upfront piece. I think if you get that established and you get those relationships established, then that'll carry you for a long time. In groups where I worked several years, I worked for many years, 4 or 5 years in a virtual group when I was at Intel. Yeah, I knew some of those people so well after 4 or 5 years that the fact that I never actually saw them didn't really mean that much. I talked to them on the phone so much, or I was in meetings with them so much on the phone that I felt like I knew them really well, and I knew how they would react to things.
It's almost like that old friend that you've maybe known for years and you haven't seen them in person in forever, but they call and you kind of pick things up right where you left off. It almost sounds like that to me a little bit.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. I think it's exactly like that's a good analogy.
Hey, Mike, before I let you go, who's someone that's been a great leader to you, and what have they done that's worked for you?
I have to think about it because I think there's different leaders in different stages of my life, right? But I think
sure.
from the business perspective, I had a manager for many years in the 90s that I was very collaborative, and I think I learned a lot from that person in particular because, and I think what I mostly learned from him is I always had a very positive attitude, very upbeat, was never really confrontational, no matter how bad the problem was. He would bring people into a room, and he would get people to focus on the issues, and we would always we work toward finding solutions. Things were never personal, you know what I mean? And I think I think about him a lot because I think he was somebody that I learned a lot from as far as learning to work in a collaborative fashion. And because I think any of us that have worked in big companies know that there's really very little that you do by yourself. And actually, I think it's a great trend. I know when we were at Pepperdine, this was sort of a method that was used, but I think that there's a trend in education that supports that, which is to get people to work in teams. That really does translate well into the workplace because I know many of the projects that I've managed have been, I want to say 100 people in some cases. You start to learn very quickly that you've got to have well-coordinated efforts and a lot of cooperation and trust if you want to get those jobs done. And that doesn't really matter if you're virtual or if you're local. And I think a lot of what I learned as far as how to get those kind of things done was from that particular individual.
Mike Demas is doing strategic planning at Micron. He's worked at Intel, and overall just a pretty smart guy. Hey, Mike, thanks so much for being here on the show.
Thank you, Dave.
As Mike and I were talking, I was writing down the key things that he was saying. And as I went back and looked at my notes, the 4 things that came out for me, you heard them and you heard them in our conversation, were number 1, when you're leading virtually, establishing trust. And boy, that goes beyond leading virtually. That's in any leadership situation. Many of us know that without trust, really nothing else can happen very effectively, certainly not very quickly. And so, but if we have trust in any leadership situation, we have the ability to really influence others, engage them, help develop them. And we all know that, but sometimes our actions don't align with that. So in a virtual situation, as you heard Mike mention, that trust building is just as important, probably even more so than it is when we're seeing folks one-on-one. We get the benefit of the doubt one-on-one, but in virtual situations, we only have those times we're interacting with that person on that connection, on that phone call, on that email. So we really do have to establish trust up front. And then the second thing, of course, Mike mentioned was flexibility. The importance of us as leaders, particularly if we're working virtually, of sometimes working on different hours than we normally would. Like Mike gave that example of working outside of his normal schedule and setting meetings on Sunday nights. That's key. And then, of course, right along with that, number 3, availability, the ability to be present for people, even if we're not physically present, to be virtually present. And Mike gave a number of examples about that. And then, of course, the 4th thing that he mentioned a lot, and I think is tremendously important whenever you're taking over and doing virtual leadership, and particularly if you're inheriting a team, a virtual team, is investing the time up front. And we could say this about any leadership situation, but especially leading virtually. Boy, if you can get out there and really build good rapport with people, go and make those personal visits, make those connections on the front end, it's going to help you tremendously as a leader. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, even if you don't lead virtually, this is a great lesson for all of us, is investing time up front to listen to people anytime we get in a leadership role. So I would challenge you and encourage you to do that. And if you found these 4 things helpful, I hope that you did. I would love to hear in the comments on the show notes what was most helpful to you. And also, if we raised questions for you, I would love to hear about them. And I would certainly jump in online and answer additional questions. And I'm sure Mike would as well. The best way to interact with us and with the other listeners of this show is to go to coachingforleaders.com/56. So again, that's coachingforleaders.com/5, 6. That's episode 56. You'll see the notes for this show there. And if you scroll below that, you'll see a form, a place you can actually add in your comments. Would love to hear from you. Any comments, questions, or feedback you have. You can, of course, always email comments or questions to me too. feedback@coachingforleaders.com. And of course, you can call as well, and happy to hear your voice and even play your message on the air here, 949-38-LEARN. Hey, if you're going to do one of those three, though, I'd suggest going on the website first. The nice thing about doing that is when you ask a question, not only can I see it, but everyone else can see it too. And so we can engage in some dialogue, and that way everyone benefits from it. So if you're comfortable doing that, go on over to the website. And hey, just a couple of quick notes before I let you go this week. A reminder that I have started up our newsletter, the Coaching for Leaders newsletter. Now, those of you who have signed up for it already, thank you so much. You've already received the 10 books that will make you a better leader. There's a video and a download for that. And if you have signed up and you're wondering, where is the newsletter? It's because the first issue is yet to arrive. And the reason I haven't sent one out yet is I'm a big believer in not just starting to send out lots of emails for the sake of sending emails. I actually want to send things to you that are valuable. So when you get something from me, it's going to be something that will be a good tool and resource to use. And so I'm in the process of putting that together. And so you will get that soon. If you're not already on the list, you haven't missed out yet. So jump on the list. You can get there at coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. And that's where you can also pick up that 10 books that will make you a better leader as a quick thank you for subscribing to the list up front, because I want you to get something of value right away. Hey, if this episode has been valuable to you, I would love to hear about it on iTunes. Many of you utilize iTunes to reach this show. And if you are a user of iTunes, go to coachingforleaders.com/iTunes. That will take you right over to our iTunes page. If you would take a moment to write us a written review, not us so much, but me, a written review, I would really appreciate that. And that would help others who would benefit from this show, who are wanting to engage and develop others, that will help them to find us and help us to continue to grow our community. So thank you in advance if you do that. And also thank you to Evelina Volli, Shushant Shrivasta, Guillermo Russo, Abby Hatch, Ricardo Torres Deacha, and Catherine Strunk, and Robin Green, who all hopped on in the last week or two to like our Facebook page. So you can find us on Facebook at Coaching for Leaders, or you can go to coachingforleaders.com/Facebook. That will take you right to our Facebook page. Lots of tools, articles, things I find interesting out there during the week, I'm throwing up on the Facebook page. I'd love to hear from you there too. Hey, a reminder, the link for the show notes is on our website, coachingforleaders.com/56. This show airs every single Monday, every Monday morning. Hey, wherever you are in the world, whatever's on your agenda today, take one idea from this show to engage and develop someone you lead. Have a great week.